Article 8, subsection 1A of the Constitution, as read in Section 7, subsection 2A of the Public Finance Management General Regulations 2019, and Section 2, subsection 1C of SI 127A of 2021, which pronounces on the Public Finance Management Regulations. Let me begin by expressing my gratitude to the guidance and leadership of His Excellency the President, Dr. Mnangagwa, during the implementation of the 2024 budget, as well as the formulation of this midterm budget and economic review. I also recognize the valuable inputs from the two Vice Presidents, Honorable General Retired Dr. Chivhayo and Honorable General Retired KCD Mohadi, as well as from colleague Honorable Ministers, on the Deputy Minister, Honorable David Mnangagwa, the Permanent Secretary, Mr. George Tongesai Wamatanga. The review also benefited from useful inputs from the Portfolio Committee on Budget, Finance and Investment Promotion, from line ministries, from business organizations, from civil society, from churches, and other key stakeholders. Madam Speaker, ma'am, let me now turn to the review statement itself. Let me start with an observation on the global economy. In 2024, global economic growth is now projected at 3.2%. This is according to the IMF World Economic Outlook report of April 2024, and this is compared to an earlier projection of 2.9%. Slide number 2 on the screen, hopefully is visible to most members. It just summarizes what's going on around the world. It's highlighted UK, Germany, US, EU, India, China, Nigeria, South Africa, and obviously the star performer on that chart in terms of GDP growth is India, projected with a growth of 6.8% for 2024. The growth projections have been revised upwards on account of anticipated higher economic activity in the advanced economies, which are expected to grow slightly higher by as much as 1.7% for this year. For the sub-Saharan African economy, it is now projected to grow at about 3.8% in 2024. This is from an initial projection of 4%. Also a slight decrease. The downward revision is on account of the negative effects of weather shocks and supply chain bottlenecks. Madam Speaker, global headline inflation is now projected at 5.9% for 2024. This is a 0.9% downward revision from the initial figure of 6.8%, which was projected in October 2023. The projected fall in global inflation is attributable to the impact of persistent tight monetary policies, the softening in labor markets, and the fading pass-through effects from earlier declines in relative prices, notably the price of energy. The effects, however, differ from country to country. I now turn to the domestic economy. Madam Speaker, on the chart there you can see the downward trend in inflation from 2023 all the way down to 2025. So that's going in the right direction, very positive indeed. I now turn, Madam Speaker, to the domestic economy. The domestic economy is now projected to grow at 2% in 2024. This is down from the 2024 national budget projection of 3.5%. This is shown on slide 5 on the screen, where we have reflected every sector of the economy. And you can see there that we expect natural negative growth from the agricultural sector at minus 21.2%. But I'm hearing optimistic numbers from the Minister of Agriculture, which is very easy. On the back of better performance.
Speaking.
But looking at the other sectors, you can see that the accommodation food sector do very well. So will the ICT sector, so the tourism sector, accommodation, food, and ICT, start performance. While agriculture obviously is being impacted by the El Nino So this Madam Speaker, is mainly attributable to the more severe
the unexpected impact of the El Nino-induced drought on agricultural output. The growth projection, however, is subject to upside potential, as wheat output during this winter season could be higher than projected. This would reduce the contraction of the agricultural sector and ultimately improve the overall GDP outlook or outcome for this year. Let me turn to inflation developments domestically. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the government undertook currency reforms, culminating in the introduction of the Zimbabwe gold ZiG, which replaced the Zimbabwe dollar on the 5th of April this year, 2024. In that regard, the ZiG month-on-month inflation remained stable at 0% in June. This is from a figure of minus 2.4% in May this year, 2024, while the US month-on-month inflation stood at minus 0.3% in June. This is from a figure of plus 0.1% in May 2024. Basically, inflation has been flat for those 2 months that are cited. In the outlook period, inflationary pressures are expected to remain subdued due to tight monetary and fiscal policies being pursued by the authorities and aided by the dissipating negative inflation expectations as the local currency unit remains stable against major currencies. I now turn to the balance of payments position. Madam Speaker, ma'am, total foreign currency receipts increased by 9.5% to $6.2 billion during the period from January to June 2024. This is up from a figure of $5.6 billion received during the same period in 2023. And this is largely driven by the growth in export receipts, mainly from gold, agriculture commodities, and manufactured products, as well as diaspora remittances. On that table, again, it summarizes the various sources of external foreign currency receipts. In line with this improvement in foreign currency receipts, preliminary estimates indicate that the current account recorded a surplus of $19.2 million in the first half of 2024, which is a turnaround from the deficit of $13.8 million recorded in the same period last year. This is on slide 8. It shows that positive trend in the current account deficit, or current account position rather. To year end, the current account surplus is projected to narrow to $44.5 million in 2024, relative to a surplus of $133.9 million recorded in 2023. Remittances grew significantly by 16.5% from $1 billion in the first half of 2023 to $1.2 billion in 2024, reflecting higher inward remittances from the diaspora, resulting in a favorable impact on the current account balance. Let me turn to the state of the financial sector, starting with the banking sector. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the banking sector remains safe and sound and continues to play an important role in the growth and development of the economy. As at 31 March 2024, all banking institutions were adequately capitalized with reported capital ratios which were in compliance with the prescribed minimum capital adequacy ratio of 12% and Tier 1 ratio of 8%. This is also evidenced by the sustained maintenance of low aggregate non-performing loans to total loans ratio, otherwise referred to as NPL for short. And this stood at 2.2%, which is below the 5% international thresholds. This is as at 31 March 2024. And this is shown on slide 9. You can see the blue line remaining firmly below the 5% threshold, and it's at 2.2% as of March 2024. During the first half of 2024, financial literacy programs have been rolled out to a number of provinces and will further be extended to the remaining provinces in the country in the second half of the year. In this regard, the number of loans to women and youth increased during the period under review. A few words about monetary developments. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the stock of reserve money stood at 6.6 billion ZiG in May 2024, compared to 6.5 billion ZiG in April 2024. On the other hand, broad money stock stood at 41 billion at the end of May 2024, reflecting an increase of 5.9% from 38.8 billion ZiG recorded at the end of April 2024. And the chart, table 10, or chart 10 showing that. A few comments on the stock market. The stock market is on a growth trajectory with the number of participants, or rather number of instruments on VFEX, Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, having increased to 15 instruments during the first half of the year. Since the adoption of the currency, the ZiG, the ZSC market capitalization went up by 35%, from 25 billion ZiG in April 2024 to 38.7 billion ZiG in June 2024, while VFEX market capitalization increased from $1.3 billion as at 30 June 2024. You can see the chart again for the VFEX level of capitalization. I now turn to public finance developments. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the 2024 national budget was formulated using the Zimbabwe dollar as the functional currency and a projected economic growth of 3.5%. Resultantly, the total revenue collections were estimated at 53.9 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, or 18.3% of GDP, and expenditures were projected at 58.2 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, and the financing gap was projected at 4.3 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, or 1.5% of GDP. Slide 13 reflects that. The introduction of the ZiG as legal tender on the 5th of April 2024 has necessitated reconfiguration of the 2024 approved national budget to reflect the change in our domestic currency. Budget developments during the review period and outlook to year end are therefore being presented in ZiG. In this regard, the approved expenditure of the 2024 budget turns out to be at 58.2 trillion. When it's converted to ZiG, it results in a budget envelope of 87.9 billion ZiG. And we've broken it down again according to the percentage allocations, MDA by MDA, ministry by ministry. And this is shown in table 14, and there's table 15 coming through. I won't go into that detail. We'll be able to see that in the main document. But to repeat, 58.2 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, the exchange rate was converted to result in a budget envelope of 87.9 billion ZiG. In terms of performance, during the first 6 months of the year, revenue collections amounted to 36.5 billion ZiG against expenditures of 38.9 billion ZiG. Expenditures are therefore approximately 44% of the total approved budget. In other words, so far, the first half of the year, we have only used 44.2% of our budget, which is good. It's not so bad at all. First quarter is always slow. We pick up from the second quarter. We're at 44.2. We should pick up speed, especially with increased demand from the social security aspect. Madam Speaker, ma'am, let me now elaborate on specific projects and programs supported during the first half of the year, starting with the human capital pillar. Human capital development is one of the 9 pillars of the 2024 national budget, given its central role in inclusive economic growth and development. To this end, during the first 6 months of the year, government expended an amount of 6.7 billion ZiG towards provision of education and 2.5 billion ZiG for health and 140.9 million ZiG for social protection purposes. In addition, development partners disbursed $85.1 million towards these three areas, complementing government efforts. A few words on the health sector budget. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the 2024 national budget committed resources amounting to 9.4 billion ZiG towards consolidation of the recovery of the public health system in all levels through provision of necessary medical personnel, medicines, accommodation, rehabilitation, and construction of health facilities, as well as provision of the appropriate medical equipment. Of this amount, 3.8 billion ZiG was earmarked for rehabilitation and construction of health infrastructure and procurement of medical equipment. In this regard, during the first 6 months of the year, 2.5 billion had been extended to the sector, with the bulk, which is 2.3 billion ZiG, going towards employment costs, as well as 166 million ZiG for hospital support, and 66 million ZiG went towards infrastructure development. Let me turn to education. Madam Speaker, ma'am, under the 2024 national budget, an allocation of 15.4 billion ZiG was made to enhance access to quality and equitable education at both basic and tertiary education levels. In this regard, an amount of 6.7 billion ZiG was disbursed to support the two ministries of primary and secondary education and higher and tertiary education, innovation, science, and technology development during the first 6 months of the year. The education sector also benefited from $12.6 million, which was disbursed by the Global Partnership for Education program. Let me turn to social protection. Madam Speaker, ma'am, His Excellency the President, Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, declared a state of national disaster in April 2024 as part of the initiatives to mobilize support to address the adverse impact of the El Nino-induced drought during the 2023-2024 agricultural season. This follows a projected shortfall in local grain production of 764,000 metric tons against national grain requirement of 2.2 million metric tons. As part of the disaster preparedness framework, a three-pronged strategy was developed in response to the national disaster, namely search and rescue, mitigation and resilience building, being implemented through the following flagship programs. 1, the Food Deficit Mitigation Program. 2, Cash for Cereal Program. 3, Grain Importation. And 4, Agriculture Input Support. These measures are complementary to the existing social protection schemes that includes the school feeding program, as well as the Fumvudza Intasa social security program. To implement the various social protection programs, 243 million ZiG was disbursed to the Ministry of Public Service, Labor and Social Welfare during the first half of the year. Government received $31.8 million as payment for sovereign drought insurance from Africa Risk Capacity Insurance Group. In addition, development partners disbursed $18.9 million during the first quarter of 2024 to complement government efforts. Furthermore, the African Development Bank contributed $1.1 million in support of agricultural productivity and resilience, infrastructure development, and institutional strengthening under their post-cyclone Idai emergency and recovery resilience program. A few comments on women, gender equity, and support to the SME sector. Madam Speaker, ma'am, to inculcate emerging issues in advancing gender equality, government finalized the review of the national gender policy for gender mainstreaming across various sectors. The National Action Plan was also operationalized during the first half of the year towards safeguarding women's rights and gender equality in the context of peace and security. To support women empowerment initiatives and SMEs, an amount of 43.4 million ZiG was disbursed during the first 6 months of the year. A few comments on the infrastructure front, starting with the transportation sector. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the focus of the 2024 national budget on transport is to enhance access and connectivity of various sectors of the economy, including the promotion of regional and international trade and high-impact projects. In this regard, government registered notable progress in major road projects, including Harare Bridge Highway upgrade, Mthuli interchange construction, Harare Kanyamba road upgrade, and projects under the emergency road rehabilitation program. And where we are, Madam Speaker, ma'am, some of you may have driven on some of the beautiful roads that have been developed around Parliament. In total, 4.2 billion ZiG was disbursed during the first 6 months of the year towards transport infrastructure projects. A few comments on the energy sector, Madam Speaker, ma'am. The country is facing shortages in electricity, mainly due to the low electricity generation capacity at Kariba hydropower station on account of El Nino weather conditions that have ravaged most parts of Southern Africa. In addition, the improved use of renewable energy sources in the country, particularly solar energy, by companies and households continues to contribute immensely to reducing power demand, enhancing the power situation. Few comments on the water and sanitation. Madam Speaker, ma'am, 382 million ZiG was disbursed during the first 6 months of 2024 towards water and sanitation projects and programs, including the following. 1, rehabilitation and maintenance of water and sanitation infrastructure. 2, completion of ongoing dam projects. 3, capacitation of local authorities. And finally, bore drilling in our rural areas. Let me turn to housing delivery. Madam Speaker, ma'am, during the period under review, resources amounting to 1.1 million ZiG were channeled towards housing delivery, mainly targeting construction, upgrading, and rehabilitation of both residential and institutional accommodation nationwide. I now turn to ICT and the digital economy, Madam Speaker, ma'am. In order to facilitate the smooth hosting of the 2024 SADC Summit, resources amounting to $1.5 million have been disbursed for the period under review towards upgrading of existing fiber network, establishing of base stations, and telecommunication services through service providers, which include Tel1, Africom, and Net1. Let me turn to devolution funding, or intergovernmental fiscal transfers. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the devolution agenda being implemented by government, especially the allocation of financial resources to the lower tiers of government, as espoused by the Constitution, is having a real impact on the livelihoods of people through enhanced provision of basic social infrastructure services. The major milestones achieved under the devolution agenda this year is the adoption and approval of the Zimbabwe Intergovernmental Fiscal Systems Administration Manual by Cabinet on the 7th of May 2024, and it was subsequently launched to the public on the 10th of July 2024. This manual will go a long way in ensuring that there is transparency and accountability in the utilization of intergovernmental fiscal transfers or devolution funding by lower tiers of government. A total of 200 million ZiG was availed under the devolution program during the first half of the year of 2024, with significant progress being achieved in various categories, including construction of schools, the ensuing provision of quality education, as well as reducing distances traveled by pupils to access educational facilities. Madam Speaker, ma'am, I have a table that provides detailed summary of expenditures during the first half across all ministries, and this is shown in slide 17 and 18. Very small letters, but it will be available in the long document. Let me turn to the budget financing, Madam Speaker, ma'am. During the period January to June 2024, central government borrowing for budget financing was done through the mobilization of resources on the domestic debt market. The total gross treasury bills issuances for budget financing for the period January to June 2024 amounted to 2.3 billion ZiG. On public debt, Madam Speaker, ma'am, the country's stock of debt as of end of June 2024 amounted to 287.2 billion ZiG, comprising of external debt to the tune of 168.5 billion ZiG and domestic debt to the tune of 118.7 billion ZiG. The debt stock is broken down as follows: 58.7% is external debt, while domestic debt is at 41.3%. And slide 19 on the wall summarizes some of the critical information. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the country mobilized development assistance from external partners or development partners amounting to $120.5 million US. This is the first quarter of 2024. Again, some information is shown on that slide 20, additional information. The resources which complemented the 2024 national budget were dispersed outside the budget and mostly through implementing agencies, and in some cases directly to beneficiaries. Looking at the outlook to year end, Madam Speaker, ma'am, the fiscal policy thrust and macro fiscal framework of the approved 2024 national budget remains unchanged under the theme consolidating economic transformation. Priority areas, however, may slightly change during the last half of the year to reflect the impact of the drought on food security and the availability of water. In this regard, the currency reforms, together with economic developments during the first 6 months, as well as the recalibration of the budget to ZiG, results in a macro fiscal framework with revenue projections to year end of 93.2 billion ZiG, which amounts to about 22% of GDP. This is against expenditures that are projected to be at 96.8 billion ZiG. And the resultant deficit is 5.6 billion ZiG, or 1.3% of GDP. And again, that slide 1 summarizes everything. You can see at the bottom the deficit at 1.3% of GDP, or 5.6 billion ZiG. Since the introduction of the ZiG currency, the economy is experiencing relatively stable prices at exchange rate. In this regard, the fiscal policy thrust is sustaining the prevailing stable environment necessary for inclusive economic growth in order to achieve the objectives of the NDS 1 and Vision 2030. Madam Speaker, ma'am, going forward, fiscal policy is being further reconfigured to increase usage of the local currency in order to sustain macroeconomic stability. On the monetary policy front, the Monetary Policy Committee is expected to utilize all monetary policy tools at its disposal to ensure price and exchange rate stability. In addition, the committee is required to ensure that any changes in monetary aggregates are in tandem with changes in the value of the reserve assets. To ensure the stability of the new currency, the private sector, inclusive of manufacturers, retailers, wholesalers, public transporters, informal sector players, and the rest of the economic players, are expected to embrace the new currency for both transactional and savings purposes. Measures to ensure stability of the currency include the following. These are fiscal measures. One, fiscal and monetary measures. One, a reserve accumulative strategy is being implemented, which will ensure that the ZiG in circulation in the economy is fully backed by adequate international reserves. Two, we want to strengthen the demand and use of the domestic currency by government, the corporate world, and the general public. In this regard, some taxes will now be payable exclusively in local currency, including payment for government services. Three, there will be continuous improvements in the functioning of the market-based willing buyer, willing seller market for foreign exchange pricing. Four, effective managing of liquidity injections into the market will be implemented, including ensuring an optimal quantity of ZiG notes and coins that will be maintained at all times in order to balance the need for transactional convenience with that of preserving the store of value properties of the local currency. Five, there will be fiscal consolidation measures that will ensure a sustainable fiscal deficit and avoidance of monetization of the budget deficit. And finally, we will maintain the current tight monetary stance and avoid any quasi-fiscal operations. Furthermore, confidence-building measures will be instituted and clearly communicated to the market. Madam Speaker, ma'am, let me now turn to some specific tax measures that we think will support the stability and promote the use of a domestic currency, the ZiG. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the tax and revenue measures that I'm proposing seek to provide relief to taxpayers, enhance tax administration, augment recently introduced monetary policy measures, as well as to consolidate the gains realized from existing measures. Let me say something about the presumptive tax. The dynamic nature of the economy requires a review of the presumptive tax regime, cognizant of the significant contribution of such operators to the gross domestic product. In view of the above, I propose to review the presumptive tax structure downwards in order to provide relief and thereby enhancing tax compliance. Let me turn to electronic cigarettes, Madam Speaker, ma'am. In order to curb the negative externalities associated with the consumption of electronic cigarettes, I propose to introduce excise duty at a rate of 0.5 US dollars per milliliter of contents of every electronic cigarette product. Let me turn to more measures designed to support the use of the ZiG, the domestic currency. Madam Speaker, ma'am, you'll be aware that the introduction of the new currency, the Zimbabwe Gold or ZiG, has already started bearing fruits in anchoring price and exchange rate stability, thus preserving currency value and rebuilding market confidence. There is thus need to create more demand for the use of this Zimbabwe Gold through fiscal policy measures. Let me start with corporate income tax. Madam Speaker, ma'am, government in June 2024 allowed companies to account for corporate income tax in both local and foreign currencies on a 50-50 basis, or with the option to cycle such obligations in line with the proportions in which income is earned. I therefore propose to amend legislation to regularize the above intervention. And going forward, I propose to amend legislation and compel any corporate whose revenue exceeds 50% in foreign currency to account for corporate income tax on a 50-50 basis. Furthermore, where a company's revenue exceeds 50% in local currency, in ZiG, tax shall be paid proportionately in the currency of trade thereof. Let me turn to presumptive tax. In order to promote the circulation of the ZiG within the banking channels and curtail practices of money laundering, thereby combating financing of terrorism, I propose payment of all presumptive taxes in local currency, regardless of currency of trade. Furthermore, in order to promote usage of local currency, I also propose payment of customs duty in local currency on selected products. Let me turn to user fees. Going forward, all user fees for government services shall exclusively be payable in local currency, unless specifically provided otherwise. Madam Speaker, ma'am, let me speak to some tax relief measures. Let me start with VAT on livestock and meat. Madam Speaker, ma'am, following the recent changes in value-added tax VAT legislation where live animals and meat is now standard rated, the industry has experienced a decline in demand due to low disposable incomes, which is attributable to the El Nino-induced drought and increased informalization. Madam Speaker, ma'am, in order to encourage formal trade, thus restoring demand on meat products, I propose to exempt live cattle, pigs, goats, sheep, and bovine semen from VAT. Furthermore, I propose to exempt poultry meat and carpenter from VAT. Let me Madam Speaker, ma'am, in view of the need to provide relief to some businesses, I propose to waive the special sale tax on beverages sugar content payable for the period 1 January 2024 to 8 February 2024. Let me turn to some tax administration measures designed to deal with some fraud activities or fraudulent activities in our transit traffic. Madam Speaker, ma'am, you'll be aware that government in 2017 introduced the electronic cargo tracking system with the acronym ECTS that uses electronic seals and transmitters to monitor cargo, in particular fuel, in response to increasing incidences of transit fraud, whereby goods imported under the removal in transit or RIT are offloaded on the local market without payment of the requisite duty. Despite the introduction of electronic cargo tracking system, rampant cases of transit fraud continue unabated, hence the need to curb such illicit practices. I therefore propose to secure duty and levies on fuel imported under the removal in transit facility by imposing payment of duty at the port of entry. Such duty and levies shall be recovered on acquittal at the port of exit. This measure, which takes effect from 1st of August 2024, will not apply on fuel uplifted from the National Oil Infrastructure Company, NOIC, Masasa Depot. The Zimbabwe Revenue Authority, ZIMRA, is directed to manage the duty refund process efficiently through dedicated bank accounts. Cognizant of the opportunity by operators to underdeclare fuel imports, as well as abuse the removal in transit facility, I propose to introduce mandatory fiscalization of domestic fuel sales with effect from 1st of November 2024. Let me pronounce on further legislative amendments on the introduction of the ZiG as legal tender. Madam Speaker, ma'am, you'll be aware that government on the 5th of April 2024 introduced the Zimbabwe Gold, or ZiG, as legal tender through presidential powers, temporary powers regulations. I therefore propose to amend legislation to provide for the Zimbabwe Gold as legal tender. Madam Speaker, ma'am, I now turn to the Indigenization and Empowerment Act. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the Indigenization and Empowerment Act provides for a specific list of business operations that are reserved for Zimbabweans. I propose that legislation be amended to provide for additional sectors which include haulage and logistics sector, customs clearing, shipping and forwarding, water borehole drilling, brickmaking, and pharmaceutical retailing. I propose that these be included as part of the reserved sector list. The stability brought by the new currency, the ZiG, provides further impetus for the transformation process, which seeks to broaden the range of locally produced goods and facilitate production of high value and complex products which will make the economy even more resilient to global and domestic shocks. The thrust and theme of the 2024 national budget remains consolidating economic transformation. With determination and cooperation of all stakeholders, the country can withstand any challenges and progress is inevitable. Madam Speaker, ma'am, as I lay this mid-year budget and economic review to this august House, I'm also presenting the following documents. A finance bill, 1, 2, the 2025 budget strategy paper, 3, the public debt report to Parliament, and finally, the citizen budget strategy paper, as well as the citizen budget, the citizen midterm budget and economic review, which is summarized and is much simpler for the general public to understand. I thank you, Chinotenda Siabonga.